The hallway of Ward 4B was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. To the Marines recovering in those beds, Nurse Natalie was just another boot, a rookie, fresh out of nursing school, who flinched at loud noises and checked vitals with trembling hands. They called her Princess. They mocked her silence. They had no idea that the hands changing their IV drips had once detonated C4 charges in Kandahar. They didn't know that the shy nurse was a ghost from a classified Navy SEAL pilot program, until the lights died, the glass shattered, and a hit squad of 12 armed mercenaries turned that hospital into a kill zone. When the screaming started, the Marines looked for a hero. They found her standing over a dead gunman, holding his suppressed rifle. Her face stone cold. The label on her badge read, S. O'Connell, RN. To the men of Ward 4B at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, however, she was just the mouse.
Officer
Natalie O'Connell was 28 years old, with hair pulled back in a severe functional bun, and a bedside manner that could best be described as clinically detached. She walked with a slight shuffle, keeping her eyes on her clipboard, avoiding the intense stares of the patients she served. Ward 4B was the overflow recovery unit for combat personnel. It was a testosterone-filled holding pen for men who were too broken to fight, but too energetic to sleep. It housed a mix of recon Marines, a couple of Army Rangers transferring through, and the occasional unlucky paratrooper with a shattered ankle. Leading the pack of hecklers was Sergeant Caleb Tex Graves. Tex was a Force Recon Marine with a piece of shrapnel in his thigh and an ego that took up 3 zip codes. "Hey, Mouse!" Tex bellowed from bed 3 as Natalie walked in with the morning meds cart. "You check the expiration date on those painkillers. Don't want you poisoning us by accident. I know reading the big words is hard." A ripple of laughter went through the ward. Natalie didn't look up. She adjusted the dosage on the pump next to bed 2, where a quiet kid named Private Jimmy Rinaldi lay recovering from an IED blast that had taken 2 of his fingers. "Your blood pressure is up, Sergeant Graves," Natalie said softly, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the air conditioning. "Try to relax." "I'd relax if we had a nurse who knew the difference between a saline drip and a tear duct." Tex shot back, winking at the man in the next bed, Corporal David Halloway. Halloway was a hulking man with a neck brace looking like a linebacker who'd tackled a freight train. "Give her a break, Tex." Halloway grunted, though he was smiling. "She's probably fresh out of community college. First job jitters." "That true, Mouse?" Tex asked, leaning forward, wincing as his leg protested. "This your first rodeo? You ever see a drop of blood that wasn't on a paper cut?" Natalie finished checking Rinaldi's chart. She paused for a fraction of a second. Her hand hovered over her pen. For a moment, a different energy seemed to ripple through her, a stiffness in the shoulders, a tightening of the jaw. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. She hunched her shoulders again, looking small. "I'm just here to do my job, Sergeant," she whispered. Yeah. Just make sure you don't faint when you change my bandages later." Tex sneered. "I've got scars that look scarier than your boyfriend." Natalie moved to the next room, the laughter of the Marines following her like a bad smell. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the cold tile wall and exhaled a long, slow breath. She counted backward from 10. 10. 9. 8. Her hand wasn't trembling because she was scared. It was trembling because of the adrenaline she was forcing herself to suppress. If Tex Graves only knew. If he knew that the community college she attended was actually BUD/S Class 294, where she had been one of 2 women in a highly classified experimental integration pipeline, a program so off the books that the Pentagon denied it existed. If he knew that the scars he bragged about were child's play compared to the burn marks on her back from a botched extraction in Yemen. She wasn't Natalie the nurse to the Naval Special Warfare Command. She was Trident Actual. Or she had been until the politics got too hot, the program was scrubbed, and she was given a choice, a dishonorable discharge and a non-disclosure agreement, or a quiet transfer to the medical corps with a wiped service record. She chose the corps. She needed the pension. She needed the quiet. "O'Connell!" The sharp voice of the head nurse lieutenant commander, Brenda Miller, snapped Natalie back to the present. Miller was a bureaucrat in scrubs, all rules, no empathy. "Yes, ma'am?" "Stop loitering. We have a VIP transfer coming in from Andrews, high security, private contractor type. They're clearing out the solarium for him. I need you on his rotation." Natalie frowned. "Why me? Usually Lieutenant Evans takes the VIPs. Miller scoffed. "Evans is on leave, and frankly, O'Connell, this guy, is apparently a difficult patient. You're passive. You won't argue with him. Just keep his head down and his mouth shut. Security is tight on this one. Marshals and private security." "Who is he?" Natalie asked. "Name's Kincaid. Some PMC contractor who got shot up in Venezuela. That's all you need to know." Natalie felt a prickle on the back of her neck. Venezuela. PMC. That meant messy work, not official military. Mercenaries. "Understood," Natalie said. As she walked toward the solarium wing, she passed the security checkpoint. 2 men in dark suits were arguing with the hospital MP. They didn't look like US Marshals. They looked like sharks in cheap suits. They stood too still. Their eyes moved too much. Natalie's old instincts, the ones she tried to drown in nursing school textbooks, flared up. She noted their shoes, heavy tread, tactical soles disguised as dress shoes. She noted the bulge under the left armpit of the taller one. A subcompact machine pistol, maybe an MP7, not a standard-issue sidearm. Why do they have heavy firepower for a hospital guard detail? She kept walking head down, clutching her clipboard. To them, she was just a mouse in scrubs. But the mouse had just spotted the cats, and she didn't like the way they were looking at the exits. The shift wore on. By 1900 hours, the sun had set, and the hospital settled into the eerie, rhythmic quiet of the night shift. The lights in the hallways were dimmed to low-vis mode, a soft amber glow designed not to disturb the sleepers. Natalie was checking the vitals on the VIP Kincaid. He was a rough-looking man, mid-40s, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and dropped on a gravel road. He had 3 gunshot wounds to the torso, sutured and angry red. He was handcuffed to the bed rail. "You got a name, sweet cheeks," Kincaid rasped. His voice sounded like wet gravel. "Nurse O'Connell," Natalie said, adjusting his IV. She didn't look him in the eye. "You look soft," Kincaid muttered, closing his eyes. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes where I came from." "Likely not, sir," Natalie replied automatically. "They're coming, you know," Kincaid whispered. The sudden shift in his tone made Natalie freeze. She looked at him. His eyes were open now, sharp and lucid. The drug haze was gone. "Who?" Natalie asked quietly. "My old partners. The company," Kincaid said. "I know too much. About the accounts. About the senator. They aren't going to let me testify next week." Natalie checked his heart rate monitor. It was steady. He wasn't hallucinating. "You're safe here, Mr. Kincaid. There are federal agents outside your door." Kincaid laughed, a dry, hacking sound. "2 suits and a kid with a badge lady the team they're sending. They eat feds for breakfast. They'll cut the power, then the comms, then they'll breach from the stairwell and the elevator simultaneously. It'll be a slaughter." Natalie stared at him. He was describing a classic Tier 1 direct action breach. Cut power, jam comms, dual entry points, speed surprise violence of action. She finished her rounds and stepped out of the room. The 2 marshals she had seen earlier were gone, replaced by a single, bored-looking MP reading a comic book. Where did the suits go? Natalie walked back to the nurses' station in Ward 4B. Tex Graves was awake, watching a football game on a tablet, with the volume too high. "Hey, Mouse, can I get some Jell-O, the green kind? And don't trip on your own feet getting it," Tex yelled. Natalie ignored the insult. Her mind was racing. She walked over to the main computer terminal. She wasn't authorized to access the building's security schematics, but she knew the admin password because she'd watched Dr. Henderson type it in 3 weeks ago. Blue Parrot, 1985. She logged in. She didn't look at patient files. She looked at the maintenance logs. Log entry 1845. Unscheduled maintenance crew checked in for HVAC repair on the roof. Log entry 1910. CCTV server 4, East Wing, reported intermittent signal loss. The East Wing was directly above them. The roof access. HVAC repair at night, Natalie muttered. On a holiday weekend. She pulled out her personal phone. She dialed the front desk security. "This is O'Connell in 4B. Can you confirm the work order for the roof crew?" "1 sec, nurse." The guard yawned. I don't see a work order here. Wait, system's acting funny." My screen just flickered. Natalie's blood ran cold. Jamming, or a cyber intrusion. "Tex," Natalie said. Her voice wasn't a whisper this time. It was flat hard and projected clearly across the room. Tex Graves looked up surprised by the tone. "What? Shut up and listen to me," Natalie said. She didn't shout, but the command in her voice was absolute. "How many of your boys can walk?" Tex blinked, confused. "What the hell are you talking about? Why are you?" Clunk. The sound was heavy metallic and distant. It came from the elevator shaft down the hall. Then came a sound Natalie knew better than the sound of her own heartbeat. Pfft. Pfft. Suppressed gunshots. Double tap. The bored MP outside Kincaid's room didn't even scream. Natalie heard the body hit the floor. "Lights!" Natalie hissed. Before Tex could process the insult, the entire hospital wing plunged into darkness. The emergency red backup lights flickered on, bathing the ward in a bloody, sinister glow. "What's going on?" Private Rinaldi panic whispered from his bed. "We're under attack," Natalie said. She was already moving. She didn't shuffle. She didn't hunch. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace, vaulting over the nurse's station counter. She grabbed the trauma shears from the desk and ripped the ID badge off her scrubs, tossing it into the trash. "Tex," she said, crouching beside his bed. "I need you to barricade the main double doors. Use the heavy cart. Do it now." "Nurse, are you crazy? It's probably a power outage. I heard suppressed fire and a body drop," Natalie snapped. She grabbed Tex by the front of his hospital gown and yanked him close. Her eyes, usually soft and evasive, were now burning with a terrifying intensity. "If you want to live, you will do exactly what I say. Get Halloway up, move the beds, Create a funnel at the door. Do you understand me, Marine? Tex stared at her. He saw something in her face that he had only seen in the eyes of his platoon sergeant back in Fallujah. The look of a killer. Yes, ma'am, Tex stammered. Good. Don't let anyone in unless they identify as friendly. And even then, check their hands. Natalie turned and sprinted toward the supply closet. She didn't need bandages. She needed weapons. And in a hospital, everything was a weapon if you knew how to use it. The hallway outside Ward 4B was a kill box waiting to happen. It was long, straight, and offered zero cover except for a few linen carts. Natalie slipped into the supply closet. She grabbed 4 scalpels, taping them to her thighs with surgical tape for quick access. She grabbed a pressurized canister of pure oxygen and a lighter she had confiscated from a patient earlier that day. Improvised explosive device. Check. She moved to the door, cracking it open. Down the hall near the VIP suite, shadows were moving. She counted 6 figures. They were wearing black tactical gear, full face masks and night vision goggles. They moved in a tight stack formation. Professional. Efficient. Room 402 clear. A voice crackled over a radio. Moving to target. They weren't here for the Marines. They were here for Kincaid. But Ward 4B was between the elevators and Kincaid's room, and the Marines were witnesses. These men were cleaners. They wouldn't leave witnesses. Natalie took a deep breath. She had no gun, no armor. Just a pair of scrubs and the element of surprise. The layout. She visualized the blueprints, the drop ceiling. She climbed up onto the shelving unit in the closet, pushed aside the acoustic tile, and hauled herself up into the crawl space above the hallway. It was tight, full of dust and wires. She crawled on her elbows, dragging her body over the aluminum rails, making no more noise than a rat. Below her, through the gaps in the tiles, she saw the team advancing. "Hold," the point man signaled. "Movement in the recovery ward." Tex and Halloway were making noise, barricading the door. "Clear the ward. No loose ends," the team leader commanded. 2 of the mercenaries peeled off from the main group and headed toward the double doors where Tex and the wounded Marines were hiding. Natalie positioned herself directly above the 2 men. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a syringe she had prepped in the supply closet, succinylcholine. A paralytic agent, rapid onset. She waited. Patience. Wait for the separation. The 2 men stopped right under her tile. "You take left, I take right," one whispered. Natalie kicked the tile out. She didn't fall. She launched herself. She landed directly on the shoulders of the rear mercenary. The force of the impact buckled his knees. Before he could shout, she jammed the syringe into the soft spot between his neck and his Kevlar collar, depressing the plunger instantly. He gurgled and went limp. The second man spun around, raising his suppressed AR-15. Natalie didn't have time to run. She dropped to the floor, sweeping his leg with a vicious kick that cracked his shin bone. As he fell, she grabbed the barrel of his rifle, redirecting it away from her. He was strong, much stronger than her. He punched her in the face, a hard, jarring blow that split her lip and tasted of copper. Natalie didn't flinch. She used the momentum of his punch to spin inside his guard. She drove the palm of her hand upward, smashing his nose into his brain, a lethal strike if delivered with enough force, but he was wearing a ballistic mask. It only stunned him. He fumbled for his sidearm. Natalie grabbed one of the scalpels from her thigh. She didn't hesitate. She severed the brachial artery in his armpit, the gap in his armor. Blood sprayed across the pristine white floor. The man dropped. Natalie snatched his rifle, a custom HK4-16, with an infrared laser. She checked the chamber. hot. She grabbed his radio and his sidearm, a Glock 19. She stood up, wiping the blood from her lip. The mouse was gone. 2 down, she whispered to herself. Inside Ward 4, B-Tex Graves was holding a metal IV pole, like a spear, terrified. He heard the scuffle outside, the thuds, the silence. "They're coming," Rinaldi cried. The double doors hissed open. Tex raised his makeshift spear, his knuckles white. A figure stepped in. It was Natalie. She was covered in dust and blood. She held an assault rifle at the low, ready, her finger indexed along the trigger guard with perfect discipline. She wore the dead mercenary's tactical vest over her scrubs cinched tight. She looked at Tex. "Sergeant Graves," she said, her voice calm and commanding. "I need you to take this sidearm and watch the rear exit. If that door opens, you put 2 rounds in the chest and 1 in the head." "Do you copy?" Tex's jaw dropped. He looked at the gun she was offering him, then at her face. The shy, clumsy nurse was gone. Standing there was a warrior. "Copy that." "Doc," Tex whispered. "Good. Now I'm going hunting." She turned and headed back into the darkness of the hallway. The hallway of the East Wing was now a fatal funnel, a tactical term for a narrow space that offered no cover and forced the enemy into a choke point. Natalie O'Connell knew this. The men hunting her knew this. The difference was that they thought they were the hunters. She pressed her back against the alcove of the janitor's station, 50 feet down from Ward 4B. The red emergency lights painted her face in crimson and shadow. The heavy HK-416 rifle felt familiar in her hands, a ghost of a past life she had buried under 3 years of nursing school and fake smiles. She checked the magazine. 24 rounds left. She had the sidearm with 15. And she had the oxygen tank she had dragged from the closet. "Echo Team report," a voice crackled in her earpiece. She had taken the dead mercenary's comms unit. "Status on the rear flank." Natalie stayed silent. She knew better than to speak. If she spoke, they'd know she was female. They'd know their team was compromised by an unknown element. Let them panic. Silence was a weapon. Echo 2. Echo 3. The voice was agitated now. "Sound off!" Natalie peered around the corner. Down the hall, 3 beams of tactical flashlights cut through the gloom. They were moving in a bounding Overwatch formation. 1 moves 2 cover. Standard military doctrine. These weren't street thugs. They were operators. Likely ex-SAS or Delta, working for the highest bidder. She looked at the oxygen tank at her feet. She had cracked the valve open, just enough so that a steady hissing stream of pure O2 was leaking into the stagnant air of the hallway. It was colorless, odorless, and highly combustible. She waited. The point man was 20 feet away. 15 feet. He stopped. He scanned the alcove. The beam of his light hit the floor, illuminating the silver canister. "Contact. I see a..." Natalie stepped out. She didn't aim at the man. She aimed at the floor, specifically at the sparking mechanism of the lighter she had taped to a tongue depressor and wedged against the wall rigged with a tension wire. It was a crude, desperate trap. She fired a single round into the wall above the tank. The spark from the bullet impact against the steel doorframe ignited the oxygen-rich pocket. Boom! It wasn't a high explosive detonation, but a rapid, violent deflagration. A fireball erupted in the confined space, consuming the oxygen instantly. The concussion wave knocked the 3 men backward like bowling pins. The heat was intense, singing eyebrows and melting the plastic of their night vision goggles. Natalie didn't wait for the smoke to clear. She moved through the haze, the HK4-16 raised. The point man was writhing on the floor, blinded. Natalie put 2 rounds into his chest plate, shattering the ceramic, and 1 into his ocular cavity. He stopped moving. The second man was scrambling to his feet, coughing, his rifle lost in the blast. He reached for a knife. Natalie didn't shoot him. She didn't want the noise to give away her exact position to the rest of the team. She slung the rifle and drew the scalpel she still had taped to her left wrist. She closed the distance in 2 strides. He lunged. She parried his arm, stepping inside his guard, and drove the scalpel into the side of his neck, severing the carotid. He grabbed her scrub top, his eyes wide with shock, blood bubbling from his mouth. "Shh," she whispered, easing him to the floor as the life drained out of him. "It's almost over." The third man, the team leader, had been further back. He had recovered. He raised his weapon, firing blindly into the smoke. Bullets chipped the tile next to Natalie's head. She dove into the open door of room 405, an empty patient room. "Contact front man down. We have a hostile," the leader screamed into his radio. "It's not the marshals, it's a pro." Natalie lay prone behind a heavy hospital bed. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her hands were steady. She checked herself for injuries. A graze on her left arm, bleeding sluggishly. Nothing critical. Back in Ward 4B, the Marines were listening. The explosion had shaken the floor. "Did you hear that?" Private Rinaldi whispered, clutching his bedsheet. "Was that a grenade?" Tex Graves was limping back and forth behind the barricade of beds. He was holding the Glock 19 Natalie had given him. He looked at the other men, broken, battered, and scared. "That wasn't a grenade," Tex said grimly. "That was an ox fuel burst. Improvised." He looked at the door. "The mouse is tearing them apart." Corporal Halloway, the giant with the neck brace, sat up. "Tex, if she's out there fighting, we can't just sit here. I can't walk fast, but I can shoot." Tex looked at the weapon in his hand. He only had 1 gun. "We hold the line. That was her order. We don't open this door unless she comes back." "And if she doesn't?" Rinaldi asked, his voice trembling. Tex didn't answer. He just racked the slide of the Glock. Natalie moved through the ceiling crawl space again. The hallway was too hot now. They would be watching every door. She needed to get to the VIP Kincaid. The mission had changed. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about intelligence. Why send a 12-man hit squad for 1 contractor? She dropped down into the linen closet next to the solarium. The air here was cooler. She could hear voices in the solarium. "Secured the perimeter. But we're taking losses. Who is the unknown?" A deep, accented voice. "South African, maybe." "Doesn't matter," a second voice replied. "The timeline is accelerated. The bird is inbound in 10 mics. Eliminate the target and burn the floor." Burn the floor. That meant they were going to set the building on fire to cover the evidence. Every patient in Ward 4B would burn alive. Natalie's eyes narrowed. She checked her gear. She had picked up a flashbang grenade from one of the dead men in the hallway. She moved to the glass double doors of the solarium. The glass was frosted, but she could see the silhouettes. 2 guards standing over the bed where Kincaid was handcuffed. She didn't breach immediately. She looked at the nurse's station console nearby. The phone lines were cut, but the internal PA system was on a separate loop. She picked up the handset. She dialed the code for the overhead speakers in the solarium only. "Attention," she whispered into the mic. Inside the solarium, the 2 mercenaries jumped, spinning around, looking at the ceiling speakers. "You are trespassing." Natalie's voice floated down ghostly and distorted. "Leave now, and you live. Stay, and you die." The lead mercenary laughed nervously. "Who is this?" "Show yourself." "I am the consequences of your poor life choices," Natalie said. She kicked the door open. She didn't shoot. She rolled the flashbang across the floor. Bang! The brilliant white light blinded the room. The deafening crack shattered the glass partitions. Natalie flowed into the room like water. Double tap. Double tap. 2 shots to the head of the first guard. 2 to the chest of the second. She was at Kincaid's bedside before the second body hit the floor. Kincaid was awake, staring at her. He looked terrified. "You," Kincaid rasped. "The nurse, the mouse." "We're past that," Natalie said, using the keys from the dead guard's belt to unlock his handcuffs. "Can you walk?" "My leg. I took a hit." Kincaid groaned. "Who are you?" "CIA, SAD. "Navy," Natalie said simply. She hauled him up. He was heavy dead weight. "We have to move. They're going to torch the building." "Wait." Kincaid grabbed her arm. His grip was surprisingly strong. "It's not just a hit. It's a cleanup. The senator. Senator Vance. He's the one who hired the company. I have the ledger. It's in my blood." Natalie paused. "What? A micro SD card?" Kincaid pointed to a fresh surgical scar on his abdomen. "Subdermal implant. They don't know it's there. They think I have it on a server. If they kill me, they burn the body to make sure." "Great," Natalie muttered. "So you're a walking hard drive." She handed him a pistol she had scavenged. "Don't shoot me. Shoot anyone wearing black." They moved out of the solarium, heading back toward Ward 4B. The hospital was a labyrinth of shadows now. Suddenly, Natalie's earpiece crackled. A new voice. Not the mercenaries. "O'Connell. Natalie O'Connell." Natalie froze. It was the hospital administrator's frequency. "This is O'Connell," she whispered. "This is Dr. Evans. I'm in the security booth on the first floor. I see you on the monitors. God. Natalie, what are you doing?" "Saving your patients." "Doctor, listen to me. You need to trigger the fire suppression system on the 4th floor, the halon system." "I can't. That will suck the oxygen out. The patient's on ventilators. They're going to burn the building down." "Evans, do it. We have oxygen masks in the rooms. Trigger the alarm now." Okay. 30 seconds. Natalie looked at Kincaid. "Put this on." She shoved an oxygen mask from the wall unit onto his face. "Why?" he muffled. "Because it's about to get very hard to breathe." She keyed her radio, switching to the frequency the mercenaries were using. She wanted them to hear this. "To the men in the hallway," Natalie said, her voice cold steel. "I suggest you hold your breath." The halon gas dump was silent, but the effects were immediate. The fire suppression system flooded the corridors with heavy inert gas designed to starve a fire of oxygen. It also starved human beings. Down the hall, the remaining 6 mercenaries began to choke. They clawed at their throats. They hadn't brought gas masks. They were expecting a quick wet work job, not a chemical environment. But inside Ward 4B, the door was sealed. The Marines had stuffed wet towels under the cracks at Natalie's earlier instruction standard anti-smoke protocol, which now saved them from the halon. Natalie dragged Kincaid to the doors of Ward 4B. She banged on the metal with the butt of her rifle. "Tex, it's me. Open up." The barricade shifted. Tex Graves pulled the door open. He looked at Natalie, then at the bloody, gasping man she was dragging. "Jesus, Mouse, You look like hell." Natalie was covered in soot blood, mostly not hers, and sweat. Her bun had come undone, strands of hair sticking to her face. She looked bored. "Get him inside. Seal the door again," she ordered. She shoved Kincaid into the arms of Holloway. "Listen up." Natalie addressed the room. The Marines, about 8 of them, mobile 4, bedridden, looked at her. The skepticism was gone. They were looking at a commanding officer. "The bad news is there are still 6 hostiles out there. The good news is they are currently choking on halon gas. But the system cycles off in 3 minutes to prevent permanent asphyxiation. When the air clears, they will be coming. They know we're in here. They know the target is in here." She walked over to the supply cabinet and kicked it open. She pulled out boxes of rubbing alcohol peroxide and cotton bandages. "We don't have ammo," Natalie said. "So we make Molotovs. Who here knows how to make a cocktail?" A young private raised his hand. "I was a bartender in Philly before I enlisted." "You're up. Use the alcohol bottles, rag wicks, lighters." Natalie turned to Tex. "I need a kill zone. Move the beds. We create a V-shape funnel from the door. If they breach, they walk into a crossfire." "We only have 2 guns, Doc," Tex reminded her. "I have this." Natalie slammed the HK-416 onto the nurse's desk. She ejected the magazine. 12 rounds left. I have the Glock with 7. And... She pulled a stun grenade from her pocket. "I saved 1 flashbang." "This is the Alamo, isn't it?" Holloway asked quietly. "The Alamo didn't have a Navy SEAL," Natalie said. The room went dead silent. Tex stared at her. "SEAL, you? Long story. Buy me a drink later. Right now, get ready." The lights flickered. The ventilation hummed back to life. The halon was clearing. "Here they come," Natalie said. From the hallway, a heavy, rhythmic thudding began. They were using a battering ram. Bam! The double doors groaned. Bam! The hinges buckled. "Steady," Natalie said, raising the rifle. She stood front and center, completely exposed, drawing the focus to herself. "Wait for the breach." Crash! The doors flew open. A mercenary in heavy armor filled the doorway, a riot shield raised. "Light 'em up!" Tex screamed. The bartender Marine threw the first alcohol bomb. It smashed against the riot shield, splashing the mercenary with blue flame. He screamed, dropping the shield. Natalie fired. Bang, bang. The man dropped, but behind him, more poured in. They opened fire. Bullets shredded the drywall, shattered the monitors, and blew apart the pillows on the empty beds. "Get down!" Natalie tackled Rinaldi as a burst of automatic fire strafed his bed. Tex was firing the Glock calm as a statue. Pop, pop, pop. He hit a mercenary in the shoulder. It was chaos. The smell of burning alcohol, the deafening noise of gunfire in a confined space, the screams of the wounded. "They're flanking," Holloway yelled. He was throwing bedpans, IV poles, anything he could reach at the attackers. Natalie rolled out from behind the bed. She saw the leader of the mercenary team, a giant of a man with a scar running down his face. He wasn't shooting. He was moving toward Kincaid, a combat knife in his hand. He intended to cut the implant out right there. Natalie was out of ammo. Her rifle clicked empty. The leader saw her. He grinned. He raised his own weapon. Natalie didn't retreat. She ran at him. She sprinted across the room, leaping over a gurney. The leader fired, but she slid underneath the bullet's baseball, sliding into his legs. He fell. Natalie scrambled onto his back, locking her legs around his throat, a sleeper hold. He thrashed, slamming her into the wall. Natalie grunted, feeling ribs crack, but she didn't let go. She squeezed. Blood choke. 10 seconds to unconsciousness. He reached back, grabbing her hair, trying to gauge her eyes out. "Die, you bitch!" he roared. "Not today," Natalie hissed. Suddenly a gunshot rang out. Close range. The mercenary went limp. Natalie looked up. Tex Graves was standing there, the smoking Glock in his hand. He had crawled across the floor, dragging his bad leg, to put the gun right against the mercenary's temple. "Nobody," Tex panted, "touches the mouse!" The remaining mercenaries, seeing their leader dead and the room on fire, hesitated. That hesitation cost them. Sirens. Loud wailing sirens from outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the shattered solarium windows. "Police federal agents, drop your weapons." The cavalry had arrived. Natalie released the chokehold and rolled off the dead giant. She lay on the floor, staring up at the acoustic tiles. She was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted. Tex slumped down beside her. "You okay, Doc?" Natalie looked at him. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time in years. "I think I need a nurse," she said. Tex laughed, a hoarse, painful sound. "Yeah. Good thing we know one." The silence that followed the final gunshot was heavier than the gunfire itself. For 10 seconds, the only sound in Ward 4B was the groaning of wounded men and the high-pitched hiss of the fire suppression system finally dying down. Then chaos broke the door down. "Police down, everybody down!" The shout was amplified, distorted by the masks of the SWAT team that poured through the shattered entrance. They moved like a wave of black armor weapons, raised blinding tactical lights cutting through the lingering smoke. They didn't see heroes. They saw bodies. They saw blood. They saw a woman standing over a corpse with a weapon near her hand. "Drop it! Drop it now!" A red laser dot danced on Natalie's chest, right over her heart. She didn't panic. Panic was for civilians. She slowly opened her hands, showing her palms were empty, and knelt on the blood-slicked floor. She interlaced her fingers behind her head. It was a movement of practiced surrender, the kind taught in SEAR survival evasion, resistance and escape school, to avoid getting shot by friendly forces in a confused battlespace. "Friendly!" Tex Graves screamed from his position against the wall. He tried to stand, but his leg gave out. "That's our nurse. She's a friendly—" "Shut your mouth!" A SWAT officer barked, kicking the Glock away from Tex's reach. "Secure them all. Sort them out at the station." 2 officers grabbed Natalie. They didn't be gentle. They wrenched her arms down, slapping heavy plastic zip cuffs onto her wrists. They hauled her to her feet, pushing her past the nurse's station. As she was marched out, she locked eyes with Lieutenant Commander Brenda Miller. The head nurse was cowering behind the reception desk, clutching a phone. Brenda looked at Natalie at the blood splattered across her face, the soot in her hair, and the terrifying calmness in her eyes. Natalie didn't look like the clumsy mouse anymore. She looked like a predator who had just finished a meal. Natalie didn't say a word. She just kept walking her head high as the flashing lights of 40 police cruisers painted the hospital walls in erratic bursts of red and blue. 2 hours later, Natalie sat in interrogation room 3 at the San Diego FBI field office. The room was designed to break people. It was freezing cold. The table was bolted to the floor, and the 2-way mirror hummed with the presence of unseen watchers. She was still in her scrubs. The blood on them had dried to a dark, rusty brown. Across from her sat Special Agent Miller. He was tired, angry, and confused. He had 4 dead mercenaries in the morgue, a wounded senator's witness in protective custody, and a nurse who had no fingerprints on file. Miller slammed a thick folder onto the metal table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Who are you?" Miller demanded. "And don't give me the Natalie O'Connell garbage. We ran your prints through IAFIS. We ran your retinal scan. You don't exist. You're a ghost." Natalie sat perfectly still. She stared at a spot on the wall behind Miller's head. "I am a frantic nurse who got lucky," she said, her voice monotone. "Lucky." Miller laughed, a harsh barking sound. "Lady, I've seen the crime scene photos. You took out a 6-man kill team with a scalpel, an oxygen tank, and a chokehold that crushed a man's larynx. That's not luck. That's tradecraft." He leaned in close, invading her personal space. "You're going down for murder. 4 counts, unless you start talking. Who do you work for? Is it foreign intelligence? Are you a cleaner for the cartel? Or maybe you're some rogue element of the CIA?" Natalie finally looked him in the eye. Her gaze was unsettlingly flat. "I want my phone call." "You don't get a call," Miller shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "You are a domestic terrorist suspect until proven otherwise." Natalie sighed. She leaned forward, the movement slow and deliberate. "Agent Miller, if you don't let me make this call, you are going to lose your pension. You are going to be reassigned to a desk in North Dakota, checking background forms for the next 20 years. Miller blinked. The specificity of the threat threw him off. "Is that a threat?" "It's a tactical assessment," Natalie said softly. "Dial the number, Washington, D.C. area code. Extension 49 Alpha Zulu. Ask for Overlord." Miller hesitated. He looked at the mirror, then back at her. There was something in her voice, absolute, unwavering authority, that terrified him more than the dead bodies. He pulled out his phone. He dialed. He put it on speaker. "Pentagon switchboard. Secure line," a voice answered instantly. "This is Special Agent Miller, FBI, San Diego. I have a detainee who claims—" "Code," the voice interrupted. Miller looked at Natalie. "Alpha Zulu," Natalie whispered. "Alpha Zulu," Miller repeated into the phone. There was a click, then a silence, then a new voice, deep, resonant. "Secure the room. Hold position. We are inbound. ETA 2 minutes." The line went dead. Miller stared at the phone. Who the hell was that? He didn't have to wait long to find out. The heavy steel door of the interrogation room didn't just open. It was flung wide. 2 MPS in full combat gear stepped in, flanking the door. They stood at rigid attention. "Room 10 hut," one of them bellowed. Agent Miller instinctively stood up, confused. A man walked in. He was wearing the dress blue uniform of the United States Navy. The gold stripes on his sleeve went all the way up to his elbow. Rear Admiral Thomas Sterling, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Admiral Sterling was a legend. He was the man who planned the raids that made the news 5 years later. Miller stammered. "Admiral, I didn't know the Navy was involved. This suspect—" Admiral Sterling walked right past Miller, as if the FBI agent were a piece of furniture. He stopped in front of Natalie. He looked at her bruises, the cut on her lip, the zip ties digging into her wrists. His jaw tightened. Slowly, deliberately, the Admiral reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. Miller stepped forward. "Sir, you can't arm the prisoner." "Stand down, Agent," Sterling growled without looking back. He cut the zip ties. Natalie rubbed her wrists, wincing slightly. She stood up. She was 4 inches shorter than the Admiral, but she met his gaze with equal intensity. Then the unthinkable happened. Admiral Sterling, A 2-star admiral snapped a crisp salute to the woman in dirty scrubs. "Lieutenant Commander," Sterling said. "Status." Natalie returned the salute, her movement sharp and precise. "Mission accomplished, Admiral. The asset is secure. The hostiles are neutralized. Casualties among the friendly force? Minimal. Just bruises and egos." Miller's mouth hung open. "Lieutenant Commander, she's a nurse." Sterling turned to Miller, his face like stone. "Agent, you are looking at Lieutenant Commander Natalie O'Connell. She is the first female graduate of the Naval Special Warfare Development Group's Tactical Integration Pilot Program. She is a Tier 1 operator with qualifications in combat medicine, irregular warfare, and counterterrorism." Miller looked at Natalie. The mouse. "But she was changing bedpans," Miller whispered. "It's called deep cover, Agent," Natalie said, her voice returning to that soft, shy tone she used in the ward before dropping it instantly. "And for the record, I was excellent at changing bedpans." Sterling placed a hand on Natalie's shoulder. "The President wants a debrief. We have a bird waiting on the roof." Natalie nodded. She turned to Miller one last time. "Agent, the Marines in Ward 4B. They're good men. Make sure they don't get jammed up in the paperwork for this." Yes, ma'am," Miller stammered. 3 days later, the sun was shining over San Diego, bright and mocking. The hospital was still under repair. Plywood covered the shattered windows of the solarium, and the smell of fresh paint tried to mask the scent of smoke. Ward 4B was quiet. The TV was off. The banter was gone. Tex Graves lay in bed 3, staring at the ceiling. His leg was heavily bandaged. Holloway was in bed 4, reading a magazine he hadn't turned the page of in an hour. They had all been debriefed. They had signed non-disclosure agreements thick enough to choke a horse. They knew what had happened, but they were struggling to process who had made it happen. "You think she's coming back?" Rinaldi asked from the corner bed. "No," Tex said gruffly. "Ghosts don't come back, kid. She did the job. She's gone." "Attention on deck." The voice came from the doorway. It wasn't a shout, but a command. Tex sat up. Standing in the doorway was a woman in full dress whites. The uniform was impeccable, tailored and sharp. On her collar were the gold oak leaves of a lieutenant commander. On her chest, above a formidable rack of ribbons that included the silver star and the purple heart, gleamed the one piece of metal that every man in that room respected above all else. The trident, the Budweiser, the eagle anchor and trident of a Navy SEAL. It was Natalie. Her hair was no longer in a messy bun. It was slicked back, professional. The glasses were gone. She walked into the room. The sound of her heels on the linoleum was rhythmic, confident. She stopped at the foot of Tex's bed. The room was dead silent. The men who had called her mouse, princess, and incompetent stared at her with a mixture of awe and terror. Tex Graves swallowed hard. He looked at the trident, then up at her eyes. They were the same eyes that had looked at him over a clipboard, but now he saw the steel behind them. "Mom," Tex croaked. He tried to swing his legs out of bed to stand at attention. "As you were, Sergeant," Natalie said. Her voice was warm, lacking the harsh command tone she had used during the firefight. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. Tex recognized it immediately. It was the formal complaint form he had filled out 3 days ago demanding her transfer because she lacked the fortitude for a military ward. Natalie smoothed the paper out on his tray table. "I believe this belongs to you, Sergeant Graves," she said, a small smirk playing on her lips. Tex's face turned bright red. "Ma'am? I was an idiot. I didn't know. I swear." "You weren't supposed to know, Tex," Natalie said gently. "If you had known, I wouldn't have been doing my job." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every man there. "You boys held the line," she said. "When the door breached, you didn't run. You fought with bedpans and alcohol bottles against armored shooters. You protected the VIP. You protected each other." She paused. "I've served with a lot of operators, gentlemen, but I'd share a foxhole with any of you any day." Holloway wiped his eye, pretending it was dust. "Even if we make fun of your driving, ma'am," Natalie laughed. It was a genuine, bright sound. "Don't push your luck, Corporal." She stepped back and came to attention. "I'm rotating out, back to the teams, but I wanted to make sure my patients were stable before I left." Tex Graves finally managed to stand up on his good leg. He leaned against the bed frame, wincing, but he stood tall. He didn't say a word. He just threw the crispest, most respectful salute of his entire career. One by one, Holloway, Rinaldi, and the others did the same. Natalie O'Connell returned the salute slowly. She held it for a long beat, acknowledging the bond forged in fire and blood. "Heal up, Marines," she said. "That's an order." She did an about face and walked out. Tex watched her go until she's turned the corner and vanished. He looked down at the complaint form on his table. He picked it up, ripped it into tiny pieces, and let them flutter into the trash can. "The mouse," Tex whispered, shaking his head with a grin. "God help the poor bastards who try to mess with her next." The events at San Diego Naval Medical Center were scrubbed from the official record. The news reported a gang-related shooting that was quickly contained. Kincaid testified against the senator, bringing down a massive corruption ring, but he never publicly spoke about the angel of death who had saved him. Natalie O'Connell, if that was even her real name, disappeared back into the classified folds of the military. She returned to the shadows where she belonged, a silent guardian in a world of loud threats. But for the men of Ward 4B, the lesson remained. They learned that day that you can never judge a warrior by their cover. They learned that sometimes the trembling hands of a rookie nurse are just camouflage for the steadiest hands in the fleet. And most importantly, they learned that when the lights go out and the monsters come, help can come from the most unlikely places. What a ride. It just goes to show you never truly know who you're talking to if you enjoyed this story of hidden identity and high-stakes action. Please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel and tells YouTube you want more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a new tactical thriller dropping next week that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and as always, stay safe and watch your six.